Well, hello, hello. It is Monday and the beginning of a new month. And I know you've probably um, had a long day. And if you see my backdrop shaking in the back, I have a cat that's decided that it would be quite nice to climb pretend trees. that you hear behind me is one of my delightful cats. Hey, who is that? That's playing games. So, fierce dose of body mind medicine today. Because this has been something that I've been hearing coming up again over and over again. Hi, Leon. Nice to see you here. And it's a particular kind of stuckness that I want to address that is different from other kinds of stuckness that you might be, finding coming up, where you're telling yourself lies and where you're perpetuating stuckness because you're maybe refusing to take responsibility for your narrative. Hi, Linda. So this is what I want to talk about today. This refusal to take full responsibility, be 100% committed, because I think this is always a key for the fact that the person that is refusing to take responsibility, or the part of you that is motivating you not to, is living in the dynamic splash of the dynamic that's sort of blaming and shaming and very judgmental. It's that old dogma of an eye for an eye kind of thinking. And it's really not sustainable. Ultimately, this, and it also requires constant shame, blame, or guilt, judgment, and separation from each other. So the level of thinking which I speak to a lot, doesn't operate from this level of blame, shame, and guilt. It comes from that we are all part of this oneness. We're not separate. We're part of this oneness. And therefore our stuckness is somehow part of this. And I can learn to work with this in a good way that allows me to get unstuck. And that's really what I want to talk about today. Hi, Kelly, Ulrika. Hi, Paula. We all have the power of choice and the ability to change our old narrative. And you don't want to be stuck in that blame and shame and I'm not responsible for my life, because let's face it, it's really boring and it just perpetuates and repeats itself over and over again. And it destroys your trust. It destroys your sense of possibility. And the most important thing about it is you begin to generate in the world exactly the thing that you're fighting against, the nature of that level of thinking, which just creates more of this great separation sickness. And you know me, if you've been here with me for a while, I always say you have to be willing to sit in the fire. You have to be willing to feel in order to heal and change your old narrative so that you can change your life. Simple, not always easy. And, as much as we can grow and evolve through the power of parables, the wisdom of our ancients, there's also an incredible amount of stories out there, in case you haven't noticed, the Brothers Grimm, the Happily Ever After, the Waiting for the Prince to rescue the damsel in distress, that we're fed as children. That is part of the programming that shapes us throughout our life and how we show up in the world. And a story that's pretty much worldwide, especially what I see in Africa, and I'm seeing it all over America right now with this Me Too movement, is an old story. We're seeing it showing up all over. And so say, for example, a person of color, from the moment they arrive on this soil in this time, the story that they're fed is that they're inferior, that somehow they don't deserve the same things perhaps as a white person. It's a ridiculous story, but it's one that exists, and it's insidious and it's constant and it's reinforced everywhere. And the power of this kind of story is not only direct in that it can inspire you to internalize that story, even as you struggle against it. But it's also very tricky, because we have many, many internal selves that can take different positions or different roles relative to certain stories and, different characters that we play. in the way that our stories cast us in the world. You know, we're the directors of our own life, but we have to own that. Otherwise, you can become very, very frustrated with a particular story that you're carrying, and then you start generating other stories. And, you know, there is a tricky aspect to it. And I think for me, this is really where going from, you know, change your story, change your life, moves into this deep understanding of the true elemental energy of our energy bodies that we all carry, and how we get into different levels out of our minds and into our energy bodies, where other stories get logged in. So, you know, there's so many stupid stories that are driven through trauma and abuse and repetition and larger cultural systems. And these are not all just in our mind. They're also taking up space in our hearts and in our bodies and in the collective consciousness that wants to function from love. And this is where the tricky bit comes, because both are true. And I think this is what trips people up a lot of the times. And this is one of the simple ways, I would say, that is the strength of the spiral pathway, or the way that I teach, which are a very coherent cosmology that moves to the forefront of all the crazy logic, trickster energy that you can often see in the shamanic world, that deals precisely with this problem of the non-logical, the irrational way that stories work. And I think it's really important here to remember that there's always a trickster prankster archetype that often runs our own lives through our own stories of what is true and what are lies that we're trying to make true. Make sense? Give me a heart, give me a yes if you're still with me. Because, you know, when we start looking at the larger collective unconsciousness, the victimology of, oh, this is the way that it's always been, and oh, but you don't understand, I'm not like you, and excuse me, all these other excuses. And that when we get embedded in those old stories or the old thinking, it doesn't allow you to be thinking at the next level. You literally are tripping around in the dark. You can't see the solution because you're stuck in the blind spots. You're in the shadows. So how do we not perpetrate the problem? Because I think one of the things that's very hard for people to understand is that when you identify with a role, when you make the story bigger than you begin to manifest the counterpart. So if you're over-identifying with a victim role, you know, which I've certainly done myself, you begin to perpetrate. And that story starts to justify your actions, and you're blind and deaf to the fact that those actions are very harmful, not just to you and your life and your business, but to other people too. And I think this is the trickster energy, that you actually become, consciously or unconsciously, the very thing that you're fighting against. And I think a lot of activists in their activist work, if they're paying attention to this, when we're fighting for peace, we're actually manifesting more fighting and not a lot of peace. That's why the anti-drug and the anti-poaching doesn't work. And something that, you know, I want to really put out there in helping people to heal from unresolved trauma and this great separation sickness that's literally spreading like a virus, like a cancer around the planet. And what I get really curious about is, why are people you know, so drawn to trauma, drama, and emergency, or looking at the wrongness of things? You see this when there's an accident, you know, everybody crowds around because they're wanting to look at the horrors. And I wonder why we're attracted to the narratives of control and fear and hunting down the terrorists, and this very uncaring attitude toward nature. And I think this comes from these perceptions of separation, the experiences of our own alienation, experiences of scarcity and betrayal and anxiety, and just a general distrust in life and in our own capacities and abilities to rise above this, as well as trusting that the universe does have our back. You know, when we do, there is no competition, there's only cooperation. And I'm tired of this world that everyone's out for themselves and nobody cares. I don't know about you. And this is something that I see a lot in the life transformation industry, that are talking of oneness, but they're still under this spell and this illusion of separation. And so they're actually creating more separation. And, cultures have pretty much preached this literally for centuries, the politics, the religions, the cults, the covens, the institutions, the secret societies. It's been there forever. But you have to remember that you have the capacity every single day to touch into the essence energies of the earth and the sky and feel the inspiration from above and the nourishment from below, and this ability to create a new thought, right? And for the point of, exactly, yeah. So I really want to talk about this thing of where people are getting stuck and buying into the limitations of prognoses and diagnoses, or the next best fad labeling of symptoms, or what your Enneagram type is, or your numerology says, or Mercury retrograde. I use the tools of spiritual astrology. I use all of those in a way to get my clients, because it's worked for myself. How do you take, and where are you getting hooked into some of these patterns of abuse that are not yours, right? They were given to you. And, a couple of years ago, I remember it was like, the trendy thing was, everybody had candida. And then the next rollout was, everyone was on glucophage, because that was the next thing that the pharmaceuticals were punting. Maybe you were part of all that. And I see a lot of very well-meaning but unqualified people in the arena of trauma resolution that haven't been through trauma themselves, let alone are qualified, to speak to real deal chronic PTSD. I want to just throw caution there that I take it very, very seriously in my work, that these are living, breathing beings that are coming, trusting themselves to trust you to support them in that. And I think it's very important to question, if you've been given a diagnosis, is it correct in the first place, And I think a lot of these tools are great because they do describe how we're different, but they don't say that it's impossible for you to do this because you're a certain type or you're wired this way, or that it makes it hard for you to do this. You're still a person with free will. You're adaptable. You're changeable. You have the capacity and the power of thought. And you have the capacity as the adult to grow your child parts up. Don't, a lot of these things, not one of them actually say it's impossible for you to heal, or it's impossible for you to overcome this. So, that's kind of a side note, but I want you to be really aware of how you're languaging, what words are you spelling into the world. Remember, your body follows your mind. So ask yourself, are you using whatever as an excuse or as an explanation, as an understanding, a deeper understanding? Because that, can become part of a diagnosis, which can then become part of a remedy. But if you're using that as an excuse, it's keeping you in that realm that I'm not going to take responsibility for change in my life because it's too hard. It's not, it's not my fault. And I want things around me to change without having to change myself. And this is a biggie. It's not easy to hear, but it's the truth. And pretty much all of us feel this way at some point or another. But most people that come to me for a session have realized that they have to take responsibility for their own lives, and they have to take responsibility to change themselves, or the situation in their lives is never going to change. It's just a given. And we all know this. So this is what I want to talk about, the stuckness that people create in their lives when they're using something that is potentially true, and we're just going to pretend that your diagnoses are real, but taking something that's important and treatable, like PSTD, and then using it as an excuse to not pick up responsibility for your life and change and transform. So I want to break this down, because this is a very human one that I hear all the time of, people saying, but I'm doing everything and nothing is working. And I'm kind of like, okay, great. Let's look at what you're doing. What did you do today? And everyone kind of goes, what do you mean? And usually what comes out of that is they're not doing everything. Okay. I'm guilty of this myself. You know, we're all busy and we all struggle with this, or they don't have the skills or the support to do what they're trying to do. Okay. So that's all well and good. But when I see people using, I'm doing everything, you just don't understand. I'm not like you. I can't because of X, Y, or Z. What I see is the person is doing a lot of things. They've learned something. Maybe it's yoga and they want to do teacher training and they want to share yoga with others. But when they start to touch into themselves, at their first, say, Vipassana or Kundalini, they move on to the next thing. And maybe they go and look at Chinese medicine or shamanism, and then they start using their new journeying skills and their new helping spirits from blame, shame, and guilt and judgment that lead to more problems in their lives, despite the fact that their mentor probably told them not to do that. So that whole thing goes sideways. And what I see is when a person is saying, but I'm doing everything and nothing is changing, and they're using it as an excuse, yes, they are doing many things, but they're not fully committed. They're 65, 70%. And when they get to that first roadblock where that thing that they're doing begins to push and pull and bring up discomfort in that place in you that needs to change, when it starts to get hard, then it's so easy to deflect to the next thing, right? The bright, shiny object thing of learning another school or trying something else. And yes, they're doing a lot of these new things that they learn every day. They're still doing some yoga. They're doing a bit of meditation. They're doing some journaling, whatever it is. Yes, it feels like we're doing everything. But a lot of the time, they're not doing everything to 100%. And when you start to talk about that, and it's like, you just don't understand because I have PTSD. We get back to the excuse rather than looking at, in your current situation, what needs to happen for you to be able to do this one thing 100%. Excuse me. So that you can start moving through the stuck place, right? And I work with people, excuse me, just like you, who are committed to moving through the stuck places, and you're not making excuses, and you're doing great work in the world. But it can be extremely eye-opening when you actually get, which of these 100 things am I doing is most directly going to help me to complete or get the result that I want. Then we figure that out. Excuse me. But take the example of yoga. When you start asking, what can I do differently so that I can move into and through the place that I bounced out of before because it was too uncomfortable or painful or too hard, or I didn't want to change it? Because this place, there's so many different things that we can choose to do. And of course, they all work if we do them, all the way, not trying, not part of the way, but 100% of the way, so that you can complete and integrate. And if we, for example, have the ancestral healing done, then complete the follow-up. If we're working and doing what we're invited to do, perhaps in the divination of your oracle cards, you have to be willing to do and go to those places that are uncomfortable if you really want change. And I know I'm being very fierce, but I say this with love, that, there's just this line that a lot of people won't cross. And you can see this across all facets of life and all of our wisdoms, where when we come up against it, we do it in exactly the same place. So 25 to 35%, we're not doing everywhere. Or all the many things that you are doing, you stop at the first roadblock, that first place where there is some pushback or resistance, or there's aspects of you that don't want to change. And I think this is where it's all about avoiding pain, or avoiding the fear of pain, right? Or that there's going to be change or disruption or disharmony, that things are going to change. Of course, it's part of our humanity that we often go there, but not every single inner self of you that doesn't want to budge is soul loss. And it certainly isn't PTSD. And I have a whole another conversation on that. But we have dissociated selves. We have parts and pieces of ourselves that are fragmented, but we have to be willing to go the distance, to go and retrieve those parts. And this is a piece that is always challenging to understand, that the wound demands its own healing. If you have a broken leg, you have to treat the broken leg. If you've got a broken heart, you need to treat it like a broken heart. A messed up story in the head needs to be treated as a messed up story in the head. And each of these things is a different kind of wound. And they all require different kinds of healing. And you can't decide if you want healing. You can't say, oh, well, I'm not going to do it. That is needed to heal that wound. It's kind of like saying, well, my leg's broken, but I don't want to have it put in a cast. I want to run a marathon. You're saying, I won't allow you to help me. And when we talk about this in the physical realm, that sounds crazy, right? But when we start talking about heart and soul and body and mind and spirit and our energy bodies, people start getting all crazy and go into wishful thinking and hoping and praying and meditating. You can't meditate yourself into abundance. You can't meditate yourself into healing. It all helps, but you have to have an integrative, functional way of doing that. And stop looking at all the places that you're distracting yourself from that last 25% that you need to fully commit to. And I think this is where the trickster energy, the prankster, asks us to look at one aspect of ourselves is working really, really hard to heal. And then there's another aspect that's working really, really hard against the 25% that you're, because that part's afraid to dig into that. And I think we need to explore why. These are the generative questions of why. Why is there conflict with these two parts and pieces of myself? And this goes back to the clearing work and the energy body mastery. Because no one can answer that for you, but I can teach you some skills to get in there, because I want you to be your own medicine. No one else knows you as good as well as you know you. So another question to ask is, why is everything you're trying to do not working for you? Why are the rules different? This is where you start to see that the rules that work for everybody else don't work for you. I would say that's a big red flag, to look at what else needs to happen here so that the practice, take the yoga example, that it can work for you. And I'm not saying, push against it and hammer away. I'm saying get curious about why the rules aren't working for you. Because you know what? None of us are that special. Not in that way anyway. Okay? But as I said, our stories are incredibly powerful. And if we begin to see the world as dead, we will kill it. If we see the world as a living, breathing organism, then we can serve its healing and heal alongside it. And in that sort of contrast, I want to look at the other parts of this sort of victimology, where you're saying, oh, you don't understand. And this is often said to practitioners. If you're talking to your best friend, maybe they have a totally different life experience. If you're a person of color saying it to a white person, you're right, they don't understand. Maybe you're men and women trying to talk to each other, and yes, maybe they don't understand. And okay, we practitioners are all human, and we may experience those same dynamics, right, with practitioners. And there's a whole lot of practitioners out there that do understand. And I think the most important thing here is, let's go back to the PTSD story of, I'm a victim, you don't understand what I've been through. I can't do that. I've got PTSD. Most practitioners, be they therapeutic or otherwise, do not want to jump into the victim hole with you. I certainly won't go there, right, and validate you as a victim. I want to validate you as a person that's powerful and capable of healing yourself, and is fully committed to that. And I see this in the trauma recovery movement. There are a lot of people out there that do understand, and they understand more than you do because they've worked with people like you. Maybe they've been through it themselves. I wouldn't be teaching this work if I hadn't experienced it firsthand and got through it and continue to get through it. But if you have experience around what you're doing, you only have your story. Practitioners deal with lots of these stories. And I think it's important to understand that I do understand practitioners who are, certified and working with this. They do understand. And I think it's important to ask, who here doesn't understand? When you're doing a generic, you don't understand. What do you not understand? What do you need to gain understanding? And ask those to the parts and pieces of yourself that are speaking like that. Is it the person that doesn't want to take responsibility because it's going to hurt, it's going to be effort, it's going to be change, you're going to upset other people? There's all these different facets of you. So, there's the current time self that is wanting to elevate and grow. There's the inner self that wants the understanding that perhaps you don't want to give. And then there's the current self that doesn't want to work the path the wound demands. They're all parts of the self that trip us up and make us stuck, because not all the parts and pieces of you want to go in the same direction. I know this super well, and I think this is the story that propagates and amplifies the pain and the suffering there. So, in closing, I just want you to remember, none of you are too broken that you cannot expose the wound to the light and transform through it. Okay? Your soul, just like mine, arrived to whole and complete and perfect just as they are. So if you're seeing a practitioner who's saying, oh, well, you can't do that because you have this diagnosis, or, you have money issues still, please find a new practitioner, okay? Because that is not a kindness. And that is, quite frankly, rubbish. Trauma happens, soul loss happens. Soul retrieval is an easy fix. Integrating it, not so necessarily easy, but you can certainly be supported in that. Repair is possible if you are willing to seek out the healing that particular wound is asking of you. Okay? So just keep this in mind. Disease is a pathophysiological response to an internal or external factor. It is very different to a disorder, right? That is a disruption of body structure and function. It's not PTSD as in dis-ease. It is post-traumatic stress disorder. It is a disruption to the regular bodily structure or function, because it's a disorder to the soul. Because nothing disrupts our function more than something happening at a soul level. And then nothing heals our functioning more holistically than something happening at the soul level. Okay? That's why healing for me happens on that soul level. Who got disordered? Where are they? What is out of order? Who is traumatized? Where are they? Who is afraid to talk to the disordered self, the part that's out of order, the traumatized self? Because none of these inner parts and pieces of yourself are the same people, right? They're parts of you. And, someone was traumatized in the PTSD experience or complex experiences of that abuse dynamic. Someone was traumatized, but it wasn't you. The you that's sitting here with me right now saying, I'm doing everything. I've worked so hard. You don't understand. I can't. I have PTSD. That you is fine. Trust me on this one. You're here, real time, present time, breathing, listening, connecting. You are capable of making new choices. You are capable of making sustained new choices, and you are capable of changing your story. Power of choice is yours, And I think this is where you need to remember miracles happen because you are miraculous. You are an alchemist, and they happen within the new story. So my question to you I suppose in completion or in expanding is, what new stories are you going to create as the author, the authority of your own life and your own divine true nature, the part of you that came in knowing that they're whole and complete. And I would love to know. I would really love to know that. Yes, Linda, post-traumatic stress syndrome. Hi, Grant. So, yeah, not necessarily comfortable. This work is not for the faint-hearted. It's for the people that are action takers, that are committed to do their own work. And if you're part of my tribe, you already know this. So how are you going to move into the last quarter of 2018? Are you going to keep dragging the old stories into another year? And what is it costing you to do that? And if it's not costing you, what is it costing the people that you love to see you constantly going round and round in that same old Mobius strip of the old stories? Let me know. Comments, questions, if you know anyone that might be looking for this, please share it, because this is what October is about. It's about integration, and it is about coming together in this We Too movement, where we change these old stories and step into creating a new earth from an empowered place, and where the power of parables can be illuminating and inspiring for other people that are perhaps still stuck in that place of saying, I'm not like you and I can't do it because I have this, that, or the other. So show up, tell your story with a whole heart. I see you, I honor you. Let's make October amazing, and let's start expanding into what we want to see in the world, and stop dwelling on the wrongnesses and the lies and the limitations that are keeping us all stuck in these old, boring stories. All right, lots of love. Bye. Mwah. See ya.